The alarm bells rang through Earth's military headquarters for the third time that week. Another colony ship had gone missing near the outer rim. Admiral Chen stood at the massive viewing screen, watching the red dots that marked lost human settlements disappear one by one from the galactic map. Her weathered face showed the strain of leading humanity's defense against impossible odds. "How many this time?" she asked without turning around. Lieutenant Torres swallowed hard before answering. 17,000 people, Admiral. The entire New Brisbane colony, no survivors. The room fell silent except for the steady hum of computers tracking the enemy's movements. The Zephyrian Empire was methodically wiping out human presence in space, and everyone knew it. These weren't random attacks or territorial disputes. This was extermination, pure and simple. Sean had been fighting this war for 8 years, ever. Since the Zephyrians decided that humans were spreading too fast across the galaxy. What started as trade disputes had escalated into full-scale genocide. The aliens had superior technology, bigger ships, and the backing of the Galactic Council. Humanity had determination and not much else. "Admiral," called Captain Rodriguez from his engineering station, "we're getting a priority transmission from the Galactic Trade Commission. They say it's urgent." Chun frowned. The Trade Commission rarely contacted Earth directly, especially not during wartime. Most galactic organizations treated humanity like an embarrassing relative they preferred to ignore. She nodded for Rodriguez to put the call through. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Ambassador Kethver of the Zephyrian Empire. His reptilian features bore the typical expression of barely concealed disgust that most aliens showed when dealing with humans. Behind him stood several other species representatives, all looking equally uncomfortable. "Greetings, Admiral Chun," Kethver began, his voice dripping with false politeness. "I bring you an opportunity that your struggling species might find beneficial." Chun kept her expression neutral. "I'm listening." "The Galactic Council has authorized the sale of a fleet of decommissioned warships. Given your current predicament, we thought humanity might be interested in purchasing them at a significantly reduced price." This caught Chun off guard. Military vessels were rarely sold to newer species, especially those currently at war with council members. "What kind of ships are we talking about?" Kethver gestured, and the display changed to show massive warships floating in space. Even through the hologram, Chin could see they were impressive vessels, dreadnoughts and battle cruisers that dwarfed anything in Earth's current fleet. 12 capital ships, including 4 dreadnought-class vessels and 8 heavy cruisers, all fully equipped with standard armaments and defensive systems. The price is remarkably reasonable, just 50 million galactic credits for the entire fleet. Chun's tactical mind immediately started calculating. 50 million credits was about half of Earth's annual military budget, but for 12 capital ships it was an incredible bargain. "Too incredible, actually. What's the catch?" she asked bluntly. Kethver's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "No catch, Admiral. These are surplus vessels that we no longer require. We simply wish to see them put to good use rather than scrapped." Lieutenant Torres leaned over to whisper in Shun's ear. "Admiral, our intelligence suggests the Zephyrians have been building new ships at an unprecedented rate. They might actually be telling the truth about having surplus vessels." Shun studied the holographic ships more carefully. They looked powerful, but something seemed off about their appearance. The hulls had an odd, mottled texture that she couldn't quite identify through the transmission quality. "When would delivery be possible?" she asked. "Immediately," Kethver replied a bit too quickly. "The ships are currently stationed at the neutral port of Kepler Station. Transfer of ownership could be completed within 48 hours of payment." The speed of the offer made Chun even more suspicious, but humanity's situation was desperate. 3 more colonies had been attacked just this month, and Earth's current fleet was no match for the Zephyrian war machine. These ships, whatever their condition, might be their only chance. "I'll need to inspect the vessels before making any final decision," she said. "Of course," Kethver agreed smoothly. "I'll have technical specifications transmitted to your ship immediately." However, I must inform you that several other species have expressed interest in this fleet. If humanity wishes to proceed, time is of the essence. After the transmission ended, Qing called an emergency meeting of Earth's top military leaders. The debate that followed was heated and desperate. Some argued that any ships were better than no ships. Others worried that this was obviously some kind of trap. Captain Rodriguez, Earth's best naval engineer, studied the technical readouts that had been transmitted. "The specifications look legitimate," he reported. "These are definitely military-grade vessels. But there's something strange about some of the data. The power output readings are inconsistent and the structural integrity reports have gaps." "Could they be hiding damage?" asked General Harrison. "Maybe, or maybe their record-keeping is just sloppy. Either way, we need to see these ships in person." Chun made her decision. "Rodriguez, take a technical team to Kepler Station. You have 24 hours to inspect those ships and report back. If they're remotely functional, we're buying them." The trip to Kepler Station revealed the true scope of what they were purchasing. The ships were indeed massive and impressive. From a distance, but up close, the problems became obvious. The hulls weren't just weathered, they were actively corroding. What had looked like battle scars through the hologram were actually deep pits where the metal was eating itself away. Rodriguez's team found system after system in various states of failure. The main engines barely functioned. The weapon systems were outdated by decades. The life support systems leaked atmosphere faster than they could replenish it. These weren't surplus warships, they were floating scrap heaps that the aliens were trying to dump on desperate humans. "Sir," one of the technicians called from inside a massive gun turret, "you need to see this." Rodriguez climbed through the cramped maintenance shaft to find his team staring at what should have been the primary firing mechanism. Instead of sophisticated alien technology, they found jury-rigged repairs held together with what looked like metal tape and hope. "These ships are held together with spit and prayer," the technician said grimly. "Half the critical systems are running on backup power, and the backups are failing too." Rodriguez contacted Admiral Chun with his findings. "Ma'am, these ships are death traps. I wouldn't trust them to make it from here to Earth, let alone fight a war." Chun listened to the report while watching the tactical display show another colony under attack. Time was running out for everyone on that world, and there were no other options available. "Can they be repaired?" she asked. Rodriguez hesitated. "Maybe it would take months of work and resources we don't have. Even then, they'd never perform to original specifications. But they could fight? If by fight you mean explode dramatically while occasionally firing a working weapon, then yes, ma'am." Despite the grim assessment, Chun knew they had no choice. Earth's existing fleet consisted of converted civilian ships and outdated patrol vessels. Even these corroded hulks represented more firepower than humanity currently possessed. The purchase was completed the next day. As the ownership papers were signed, Kethver couldn't hide his amusement anymore. His diplomatic mask slipped, revealing the cruel satisfaction underneath. "I do hope these vessels serve your species well," he said with barely concealed laughter. "They should provide adequate protection for your remaining colonies." The other alien representatives joined in the barely suppressed mirth. To them, this was the perfect solution. Humans would waste their remaining resources on useless ships and die slightly more slowly than before. As the alien delegation departed, Chin stood on the observation deck of Kepler Station watching the corroded fleet that now belonged to humanity. The ships looked even worse than the reports had suggested. Holes in the hulls were visible even from this distance, and several vessels were visibly listing as their internal systems struggled to maintain basic functions. "Admiral," Rodriguez said quietly beside her, "what are we going to do with these things?" Chun studied the ships that represented humanity's last hope. They were broken, outdated, and probably dangerous to operate. But they were also the only chance her species had for survival. "We're going to make them work," she said simply. "Whatever it takes." Behind them, the sound of Zephyrian laughter still echoed through the station's corridors. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. Humans had always been good at taking broken things and making them better. Now they would have the chance to prove just how resourceful they could be when their very survival depended on it. The first week with the new ships was a disaster. 3 crew members nearly died when the life support system failed on the flagship during a routine inspection. Another ship's gravity generator malfunctioned, sending everything not bolted down floating to the ceiling. The weapon systems wouldn't even power up on half the vessels, and those that did immediately overheated and shut down. Captain Rodriguez stood in what used to be the main engineering bay of the largest dreadnought, surrounded by sparking consoles and the smell of burning circuitry. His team of engineers looked exhausted and frustrated. They'd been working around the clock for days, and every system they tried to repair seemed to break 2 more. "Sir, we've got another problem," called Chief Engineer Park from across the bay. She was hanging upside down, trying to reach a control panel that had somehow ended up mounted on the ceiling. "The main power distributor is completely fried. I don't even know what it's supposed to look like when it's working." Rodriguez wiped sweat from his forehead and looked around at the mess. The alien technology was unlike anything they'd ever seen. The designs made no logical sense to human minds. Pipes ran in impossible spirals. Control systems were scattered randomly throughout each ship, and the instruction manuals were written in 17 different alien languages, none of which humans could fully understand. "What about the backup?" "Power?" he asked. "That's the funny thing," Park replied, finally reaching the panel and pulling off its cover. "There isn't really a backup system. They designed everything to work perfectly the first time, every time. When something breaks, they just throw the whole ship away and build a new one." This was the fundamental problem they kept running into. The alien engineers who built these ships had never considered the possibility of field repairs or maintenance. Every component was designed to last exactly as long as the original warranty period, then fail catastrophically. It was planned obsolescence taken to an extreme that human engineers found almost insulting. Rodriguez called a meeting of all the technical teams working on the fleet. They gathered in the cargo bay of the least damaged ship, sitting on crates of spare parts that mostly didn't fit anything they were trying to fix. "All right, people," he began, looking at the tired faces around him. "We all know these ships are basically floating junkyards. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" "Honestly, sir," said one of the younger engineers, "maybe we should. Just strip them for parts and build our own ships. At least then we'd understand how everything works." Several heads nodded in agreement, but Park shook her head. "We don't have time for that. Even if we started today, it would take years to build a single ship from scratch. The Zephyrians aren't going to wait for us to reinvent spacecraft engineering. So what do you suggest?" Rodriguez asked. Park stood up and walked over to a damaged hull plate that had been removed from one of the ships. The metal was pitted with corrosion and looked ready to crumble at any moment. But as she pointed to it, her eyes lit up with an idea. "Look at this," she said, running her finger along one of the corroded sections. "Everyone keeps talking about how damaged this armor is. But what if the damage isn't the problem? What if it's the solution?" The other engineers looked at her like she'd lost her mind. The armor plating was obviously the weakest part of the entire fleet. Some sections were so corroded that you could poke holes through them with a screwdriver. "Think about it," Park continued. "This corrosion isn't random. It's following specific patterns along the metal's grain structure. What if we could control that process? Instead of trying to fix the corrosion, what if we use it?" She grabbed a portable scanner and ran it over the damaged plate. The readout showed something interesting. The corroded areas were actually denser than the original metal in some places. The chemical process that was eating away at the armor was also creating new molecular bonds that were stronger than what the aliens had originally built. "This is impossible," muttered one of the senior engineers. "Corrosion weakens metal. It doesn't strengthen it." "Not always," Park replied. "Remember, this isn't human metal. We don't know all the properties of these alien alloys. What looks like destructive corrosion to us might actually be some kind of natural hardening process that the original builders never discovered." Rodriguez was starting to see where she was going with this. You're talking about controlled corrosion, deliberately damaging the armor to make it stronger. Exactly. But that's just the beginning. Look at these power systems. She led them over to a pile of burned-out alien components. They're designed to run at exactly one power level, no more. No less, but our human electronics are built to be flexible. What if we replaced their rigid systems with our adaptable ones? The idea was starting to catch on. Another engineer picked up one of the alien power cores. These things are like fancy light bulbs. They work perfectly until they burn out, then you throw them away. But our human generators are built to be repaired and modified, right? Park said excitedly. We stop trying to fix their technology and start replacing it with ours. Use their hull and basic structure, but fill it with human engineering. Over the next few days, Park's team began experimenting with controlled corrosion techniques. They discovered that by introducing specific chemicals to the alien armor plating, they could direct the corrosion process to follow predetermined patterns. The result was armor that looked even more damaged than before, but was actually 3 times stronger than the original material. Meanwhile, other teams started ripping out alien control systems and replacing them with human computers. The alien interfaces were confusing and inflexible, designed for species with completely different ways of thinking. Human controls were intuitive and could be easily modified as needed. The real breakthrough came when they started combining the 2 approaches. The corroded armor plates didn't just provide better protection, they also conducted electricity in unexpected ways. This made them perfect for housing the jury-rigged human electronics that were replacing the alien systems. Rodriguez watched as his teams worked with renewed energy. Instead of trying to restore the ships to their original condition, they were creating something entirely new. The vessels were starting to look like a bizarre mixture of alien architecture and human practicality. "Sir," called one of the technicians working on the weapons systems, "you need to see this." Rodriguez climbed up to the main gun turret where the team had been struggling with the ship's primary cannon for weeks. The alien weapon was powerful but incredibly complex, with dozens of subsystems that all had to work perfectly together. "We couldn't get their targeting system to work," the technician explained, "so we ripped it out and installed one of our missile guidance computers instead. But look what happened." He activated the weapon and Rodriguez watched in amazement as the targeting display lit up with information. Not only was the human computer able to control the alien weapon, it was actually improving its performance. The targeting was more accurate, the power consumption was lower, and the firing rate was nearly doubled. "How is this possible?" Rodriguez asked. "The alien system was over-engineered," the technician replied. "It was trying to calculate every possible variable before firing. Our system just aims and shoots. Sometimes simple is better." Word of the successful modifications spread quickly through the fleet. Soon, every ship had teams of engineers crawling through its corridors, replacing alien components with human alternatives. They learned to work in zero gravity when the artificial gravity failed, to breathe recycled air when the life support stuttered, and to see in the dark when the lighting systems gave up entirely. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Several people were injured when modified systems overloaded or exploded, but for every failure there were 2 successes. The ships were slowly becoming functional, though they looked nothing like their original designs. Park discovered that the corroded hull sections could be used as natural heat sinks for the human electronics. The random-looking patterns of corrosion actually helped dissipate heat more efficiently than any designed cooling system. What the aliens had seen as irreparable damage, humans turned into a feature. The most dramatic change was in the ship's engines. The original alien drives were incredibly sophisticated but also incredibly fragile. They required perfect fuel, perfect maintenance, and perfect operating conditions. When any of those factors were missing, they simply stopped working. Rodriguez's team replaced them with modified human fusion drives, less elegant, perhaps, but infinitely more reliable. The new engines were louder, produced more vibration, and definitely weren't as fuel efficient as the originals. but they worked under any conditions and could be repaired with basic tools. By the end of the month, the fleet was barely recognizable. The ships still had their original alien shapes, but every surface was covered with human modifications. Corroded armor plates were held in place by welded human steel brackets. Alien corridors were lit by human-made LED strips powered by jury-rigged electrical systems. The bridges were a chaotic mix of alien architecture and human control panels. Admiral Qian toured the modified flagship with a mixture of pride and amazement. The ship hummed with activity as human crew members. The warning came at 0347 hours, ship time. Lieutenant Torres burst into Admiral Chun's quarters with news that made her blood run cold. The long-range sensors had detected a massive Zephyrian fleet heading straight for the Tau Ceti colony. 47 warships, including 6 of their newest battle cruisers, were just 18 hours away from the human settlement. Chun dressed quickly and rushed to the command center. The tactical display showed the approaching enemy fleet as a cluster of red dots moving with deadly purpose. Tau Ceti was home to nearly 2 million humans, including thousands of families who had fled there after losing their homes in previous attacks. How long until our fleet can reach them? She asked. Captain Rodriguez was already running calculations. 16 hours if we push the engines to maximum. But Admiral, are we really ready for this? Most of our ships have only been spaceworthy for 3 weeks. Chun stared at the display. Their modified fleet looked impressive on paper, but they'd never actually fought a real battle. All their repairs and improvements were based on theory and hope. Now they were about to face the most advanced military force in the galaxy, with ships held together by human stubbornness and spare parts. "We don't have a choice," she said finally. "Send the order. All ships prepare for immediate departure." The journey to Tau Ceti was tense. Throughout the fleet, crews ran final checks on systems that had never been tested in combat. The corroded armor plating that Chief Engineer Park's team had turned into an advantage looked even worse under the harsh light of the ship's new, human-made lighting systems. To anyone who didn't know better, the fleet looked like it was falling apart. In the engine rooms, human technicians monitored the jury-rigged fusion drives that had replaced the original alien propulsion systems. The engines ran hot and loud, vibrating through the hull in a way that would have horrified the original designers. But they were reliable, and that's what mattered now. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the flagship, looking out at her small fleet. 12 ships against 47. Modified wrecks against state-of-the-art warships. It should have been a massacre, and everyone knew it. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian fleet." The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Vorthak, the Zephyrian commander. His reptilian features showed the typical alien arrogance that humans had come to expect. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship gleamed with advanced technology that made even their modified ships look primitive. "Admiral Chun," Vorthak began, his voice carrying across space with crystal clarity, "I see you have arrived to witness the final cleansing of this human infestation. How thoughtful of you to bring your entire fleet. We will destroy you all at once, saving us the trouble of hunting you down later." Chen kept her expression neutral, though her crew could see the anger in her eyes. "Admiral Vorthak, you are in violation of galactic law by attacking civilian colonies. Withdraw your forces immediately." Vorthak's laughter was cold and mechanical. "Galactic law? Humans have no rights under galactic law. You are vermin, and we are the exterminators. But I must say I'm curious about your ships. Our sensors show them as the same vessels we sold you, but they look different somehow. Did you actually try to repair those broken hulks?" "Something like that," Chung replied calmly. "How amusing." "Well, it won't matter. Even if you somehow made those scrap heaps functional, they're still decades behind our current technology. You cannot possibly hope to win this battle." The transmission ended, and Chun turned to her crew. "All ships, battle stations, prepare for engagement." As the two fleets approached each other, the difference in their appearance was striking. The Zephyrian ships were sleek and pristine, their hulls gleaming with advanced materials that seemed to absorb light. They moved in perfect formation, each vessel exactly where it was supposed to be. The human fleet looked like a collection of floating junkyards by comparison. The corroded hulls were patched with different colored metals. Sections of each ship had been rebuilt with human components that didn't match the original architecture. They moved in a loose formation that looked almost chaotic compared to the alien precision. "Enemy fleet is powering weapons," reported the tactical officer. "They're splitting into 3 attack groups." Chun watched the enemy formation change on her display. It was a classic Zephyrian tactic, overwhelming firepower. From multiple directions designed to destroy the enemy quickly and efficiently. Against any normal fleet, it would have been devastatingly effective. "All ships, implement scatter pattern delta," she ordered. "Let's see how they handle a moving target." What happened next surprised everyone, including the humans. Instead of maintaining their formation, the human ships began moving in seemingly random directions. But this wasn't chaos, it was adaptation. Each captain was using the improved maneuverability that came from their jury-rigged engines to create unpredictable flight patterns. The Zephyrians opened fire first, their advanced weapon systems launching brilliant beams of energy across space. But the shots that should have destroyed human ships instead struck empty space. The modified human vessels were moving in ways that the alien targeting computers couldn't predict. "Return fire," Chun ordered. The human weapons were a mixture of original alien systems and human modifications. They didn't fire in neat, organized volleys like the Zephyrian fleet. Instead, each ship fired when its weapons were ready, creating a constant stream of incoming projectiles that the enemy couldn't easily track. Admiral Vorthak stared at his tactical display in confusion. His advanced sensors were showing him impossible readings. The human ships weren't just avoiding his weapons, they were accelerating and maneuvering beyond what should have been possible for vessels of their size and design. "Status report," he demanded. "Sir, the human vessels are performing maneuvers that exceed their original specifications by 300%, his tactical officer reported. "Their power output is also much higher than expected." "That's impossible. Those ships are ancient and corroded. How are they moving like that?" The answer was in the modifications that Park's engineering teams had made. The corroded armor plating wasn't just stronger than the original, it was also lighter. The human fusion drives produced more raw power than the delicate alien engines they'd replaced. The result was ships that could accelerate faster and turn quicker than anything the Zephyrians had ever faced, but the real surprise came when the Zephyrian weapons finally started hitting their targets. The first direct hit struck the port side of one of the human cruisers. Everyone expected to see the ship explode or at least suffer catastrophic damage. Instead, something unexpected happened. The corroded armor absorbed the energy blast and dispersed it across the hull in a pattern of bright sparks. The ship shuddered under the impact but kept fighting. The armor that looked like it was ready to fall apart was actually redirecting the enemy fire in ways that the original designers had never intended. "What just happened?" Vorthak demanded as he watched his most powerful weapons fail to destroy a ship that looked like it was held together with tape. "Sir, the human vessel's hull is dispersing our energy weapons in an irregular pattern. Our targeting computers can't compensate for the random reflection angles." This was exactly what Park had hoped for when she developed the controlled corrosion process. The pitted, damaged-looking surface of the armor created thousands of tiny angles that scattered incoming energy in unpredictable directions. Instead of absorbing the full force of each blast, the ships were spreading it out across their entire hull. The battle began to turn as more human ships reached weapons range. Their mixed arsenal of alien and human weapons created a chaotic battlefield that the disciplined Zephyrian forces couldn't adapt to. Every time they thought they understood the human tactics, the pattern would change. Captain Rodriguez, commanding one of the smaller cruisers, discovered another advantage of their modifications. His ship's sensors, a combination of human electronics and alien detection systems were picking up enemy movement patterns that pure alien or pure human technology would have missed. "All ships," he broadcast. "The enemy cruisers have a blind spot in their rear sensor array. If we approach from below and behind, they can't track us." This kind of tactical information sharing was something the Zephyrians hadn't expected. Their own fleet operated on strict hierarchy. Orders flowed down from the top, and lower-ranking officers didn't make suggestions. The human fleet operated more like a pack of wolves, with each ship adapting to opportunities as they appeared. As the battle continued, Admiral Vorthak found himself facing a reality he'd never considered possible. His advanced fleet was losing to what he'd thought were broken-down wrecks piloted by primitive humans. His weapons couldn't penetrate their ridiculous-looking armor. His sensors couldn't track their erratic movements. His tactics couldn't counter their chaotic strategy. "Sir," his communications officer reported with barely concealed panic, "we've lost 7 ships. The humans have only lost 2. Vorthak stared at the tactical display. The human ships were scattered across the battlefield, each one moving independently but somehow coordinating their attacks. They looked like they were barely holding. News of humanity's victory at Tau Ceti spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in centuries, someone had defeated a full Zephyrian battle fleet in open combat. The impossible had happened, and every species in known space was trying to understand how. In the grand chambers of the Galactic Council on Centralus Prime, emergency sessions were being called every day. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to watch recordings of the battle, their faces showing a mixture of disbelief and growing concern. The grainy footage showed human ships that looked like they were falling apart somehow, outmaneuvering and destroying state-of-the-art Zephyrian warships. Council Chairman Zareth, a tall being from the Altarian Confederation, replayed the same battle sequence for the 10th time that day. "How is this possible? Our intelligence reports indicated that humanity purchased a fleet of decommissioned vessels, corroded hulks that were barely spaceworthy." Ambassador Kethver sat in his designated area, trying to hide his growing panic behind a mask of diplomatic calm. The same ships he had personally overseen the sale of were now being discussed as a threat to galactic stability. What was supposed to have been a cruel joke had become his worst nightmare. "Perhaps there was an error in our initial assessment," suggested the representative from the hegemony of worlds. "Maybe the ships weren't as damaged as we believed." Kethver knew better. He had personally inspected those vessels before the sale. They were genuine wrecks, held together by emergency repairs and sheer luck. The humans shouldn't have been able to make them space-worthy, let alone turn them into effective warships. "I want a full investigation," Chairman Zareth declared. "Find out what these humans have done to those ships, and find out now." Meanwhile, in the depths of space, Admiral Chun was dealing with problems she'd never expected to have. Victory was bringing its own challenges. The human fleet was receiving distress calls from a dozen different species, all begging for protection from Zephyrian oppression. "Admiral," Lieutenant Torres reported from the communications station, "we're getting another request for assistance. This time it's from the Kandari Mining Consortium. They're offering to pay us in rare metals if we'll help defend their asteroid facilities." Chun studied the tactical display showing their current position. The fleet was spread across 3 star systems, with individual ships responding to various crises. What had started as a desperate defense of human colonies was turning into something much larger. "How many ships do we have available for deployment?" she asked Captain Rodriguez. "That's the problem, ma'am. We're getting more requests than we can handle. Every species that's ever been bullied by the Zephyrians wants our help. But we only have 12 ships, and some of them are still undergoing repairs from the last battle." The success at Tau Ceti had revealed something that nobody, including the humans themselves, had fully understood. Their modified ships weren't just effective against Zephyrian technology, they were superior to it in many ways. The jury-rig systems and corroded armor that looked so primitive were actually more advanced than anything the galaxy had seen before. Chief Engineer Park was discovering new advantages every day. The controlled corrosion process she'd developed was having unexpected effects on the ship's electronics. The pitted metal surface was creating natural electromagnetic shielding that made human ships nearly invisible to certain types of sensors. "Captain Rodriguez," she called from her position in the main engineering bay, "you need to see this." Rodriguez climbed down to where Park was working on a section of the ship's outer hull. She had connected a portable scanner to one of the corroded armor plates and was studying the readout with fascination. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "This corroded section is acting like a natural antenna array," she explained. "It's picking up communications from ships that are light years away. The random pattern of the corrosion is creating reception capabilities that no design system could match." This discovery had immediate tactical implications. Human ships could now intercept enemy communications from distances that should have been impossible. They were listening to Zephyrian fleet movements, supply schedules, and strategic planning in real time. But the most important change was happening in the workshops and repair bays scattered throughout the fleet. Human engineers were learning to replicate and improve upon their accidental discoveries. Every captured Zephyrian component was studied, reverse-engineered, and incorporated into their existing systems. The process was chaotic and dangerous. Half the experiments failed spectacularly, sometimes taking entire work areas with them. But the other half produced improvements that pushed their capabilities even further beyond what should have been possible. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, leading one of the engineering teams, made a breakthrough while trying to repair a damaged weapon system. The alien energy cannon had been partially destroyed in the battle, leaving twisted metal and exposed crystals that most engineers would have written off as scrap. "Instead of trying to fix this thing," Hayes told his team, "what if we rebuild it using our own power systems?" The result was a weapon that fired faster, hit harder, and used less energy than the original alien design. More importantly, it could be manufactured using human industrial techniques, meaning they could build more of them. Word of this success spread quickly through the fleet. Soon, every ship had teams working on similar projects. The humans weren't just maintaining their captured technology anymore. They were improving it and making it their own. Ambassador Kethver received increasingly urgent reports from Zephyrian intelligence services. Human ships were appearing in systems where they had no business being. They were defending species that had been under Zephyrian control for generations. Most alarming of all, they were winning every engagement. "How many ships do the humans have now?" demanded High Admiral Zarkt H during an emergency military briefing. Kethver consulted his latest intelligence reports. "Our scouts report at least 30 vessels of various sizes, but that's impossible. We only sold them 12 ships. Then where are the others coming from?" The answer was both simple and terrifying. The humans weren't just repairing the ships they'd bought. They were building new ones. Every Zephyrian vessel they captured was being converted using the same techniques they'd developed for their original fleet. Enemy ships that were damaged but salvageable were being transformed into hybrid human-alien warships, but even more disturbing were the reports of completely new ships appearing in the human fleet. These vessels bore no resemblance to any known design. They looked like they'd been built from scratch using principles that no galactic engineer understood. "Sir," a junior intelligence officer reported nervously, "we're also receiving reports of other species attempting to replicate human modifications to their own ships. The Kandari have apparently tried to duplicate the human armor corrosion process." High Admiral Zarkt H felt a chill run through his scaled hide. "With what results?" "They destroyed 3 of their own ships in the attempt, sir." "But they're still trying." This was the scenario that the Zephyrian leadership had never considered. They'd built their empire on technological superiority, confident that no other species could match their engineering capabilities. The idea that primitive humans could not only match but surpass their technology was shaking the foundation of everything they believed. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim territories, the human fleet was having an impact far beyond their numbers. Species that had been under Zephyrian domination for centuries were beginning to resist. They couldn't replicate human technology, but they could follow human examples of determination and creativity. The Altarian rebels, who had been fighting a losing guerrilla war for decades, suddenly found themselves with human advisors and captured Zephyrian weapons. The hegemony of worlds, traditionally neutral in galactic conflicts, began secretly providing supplies to human forces, most significantly the Crystalline Collective, whose advanced computing systems had been enslaved by the Zephyrians for generations. Offered to share their technology with humanity in exchange for protection, Admiral Chun found herself commanding not just a fleet, but a growing alliance of species that had found hope in humanity's example. The ships that the Zephyrians had sold as corroded junk were becoming symbols of resistance across the galaxy. "Admiral," Captain Rodriguez said during one of their strategic planning sessions, "we're receiving intelligence that the Zephyrians are planning a massive counterattack. They're pulling ships from across their empire for a final assault on Earth itself." Chun studied the intelligence reports. The numbers were staggering. Over 200 Zephyrian warships were being assembled for what they were calling the final solution to the human problem. "How long do we have?" she asked. 6 months, maybe less." Chen looked at the tactical display showing the positions of her expanded fleet. 57 ships now, a mixture of modified originals, converted captures, and newly built vessels that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Against 200 of the enemy's finest warships, it still seemed impossible. 5 years had passed since the desperate purchase of 12 corroded warships, and the galaxy barely recognized itself. What had started as humanity's last-ditch effort to survive had grown into something that challenged every assumption about power, technology, and civilization itself. Admiral Chun stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching the largest fleet assembly in human history. The viewing port showed hundreds of ships stretching into the distance, some recognizably human, others bearing the distinctive marks of allied species, and many that defied classification entirely. These hybrid vessels combined technologies from dozens of different civilizations, held together by human ingenuity and shared determination. "Final count, Admiral," reported Captain Rodriguez as he joined her at the window. 437 ships ready for battle. The Crystalline Collective just arrived with their computational support vessels, and the Kandari mining ships have been retrofitted with the new weapon systems. Chun nodded, still amazed by what they'd accomplished. The fleet before her represented every species that had suffered under Zephyrian oppression. Some had contributed ships, others had provided technology or resources, and a few had offered nothing but moral support. But they were all here, united by a common cause that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. The transformation hadn't been easy. Human technology had advanced at a pace that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. The controlled corrosion techniques developed by Chief Engineer Park were now being used to create entirely new types of armor and hull materials. The jury-rigged fusion drives had evolved into power systems that outperformed anything the galaxy had ever seen, but the real breakthrough had come from cooperation with other species. The Altarians had shared their gravitational manipulation technology, allowing human ships to move in ways that defied physics. The hegemony of worlds had contributed their advanced manufacturing techniques, enabling the rapid construction of new vessels. Most importantly, the Crystalline Collective had provided computing power that allowed human engineers to design and test new technologies at incredible speed. "Any word from our scouts?" Chun asked. Rodriguez's expression grew serious. "The Zephyrian fleet is massive, Admiral. Our latest intelligence puts them at just over 600 ships, including their newest dreadnoughts. They're calling it the Final Purification Fleet. Intelligence suggests they plan to destroy not just humanity, but every species that has allied with us. The approaching battle would determine the future of galactic civilization." The Zephyrians had assembled the largest military force in their empire's history, pulling ships from every corner of their territory. They were confident that sheer numbers would overwhelm the human alliance. No matter how advanced their technology had become, Admiral Vorthak, now commanding the Zephyrian assault fleet, had spent months planning this attack. His failure at Tau Ceti had cost him his reputation and nearly his life. This was his chance for redemption, and he intended to make sure that no trace of human influence remained in the galaxy. "Status report," he demanded as his massive fleet prepared to enter Earth's solar system. "All ships ready for engagement." "Sir," his tactical officer replied. "The human fleet appears to be concentrated near their home planet. Our sensors show approximately 400 vessels." Vorthak studied the tactical display with satisfaction. Even accounting for human technological improvements, 600 ships should easily defeat 400. The humans had been lucky before, but luck wouldn't save them from overwhelming force. "Begin the attack," he ordered. "No human ship leaves this system alive." The battle began at the edge of Earth's solar system, near the orbit of Pluto. The two fleets approached each other like ancient armies preparing for war, but the scale was beyond anything in galactic history. Thousands of individual weapon systems powered up, millions of crew members prepared for combat, and the fate of multiple civilizations hung in the balance. Chun watched from her command center as the enemy fleet came into range, the Zephyrian. Ships were impressive as always, sleek, powerful, and perfectly organized. But her own fleet looked like something from a fever dream. The ships were a chaotic mixture of designs, colors, and technologies that shouldn't have been able to work together. "All ships, implement battle pattern Omega," she ordered. "Remember, we're not trying to match their formation. We're trying to break it." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. Instead of meeting the Zephyrian assault head-on, the human alliance fleet scattered into dozens of smaller groups. Each group moved independently, using the advanced maneuvering capabilities that had been developed from the original corroded ships. The Zephyrians found themselves facing an enemy that refused to fight according to established rules. Human ships appeared where they shouldn't be able to go, fired weapons that behaved in unexpected ways, and disappeared before return fire could be effectively targeted. But the real surprise came from the Allied ships. The Crystalline Collective vessels used their computational abilities to predict and counter Zephyrian tactics in real time. The Altarian ships created gravitational distortions that threw enemy formations into chaos. The modified Kandari mining ships proved surprisingly effective at ramming attacks. Their reinforced hulls designed for asteroid impacts, Vorthak watched his carefully planned assault dissolve into confusion. His ships were fighting dozens of separate battles instead of one coordinated engagement. Every time his forces adapted to one human tactic, 3 new ones would appear. "Sir," his communications officer reported with barely controlled panic, "we're losing ships faster than our computers can track. The humans seem to know our movements before we make them." The truth was even more disturbing. The advanced sensor arrays that human engineers had accidentally discovered in the corroded hull plating were now being used across the entire fleet. They could intercept Zephyrian communications, track individual ships through hyperspace, and predict enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. As the battle raged on, another factor became apparent. The human ships weren't just fighting, they were learning. Every Zephyrian tactic that succeeded once would fail the second time it was tried. The fleet's collective intelligence was adapting faster than any traditional military force could respond. Chief Engineer Park, now commanding her own ship after years of developing the technology that made this battle possible, watched as her latest creation proved its worth. The vessel she'd designed looked like a floating junkyard, covered in the signature corroded plating that had become humanity's trademark. But it moved like a dancer and hit like a sledgehammer. "Target their command ship," she ordered her weapons. "Crew, let's see how their admiral handles a direct challenge." The shot that followed was impossible by all known laws of physics. The energy beam seemed to bend around obstacles, change direction mid-flight, and punch through shields that should have been impenetrable. It struck Vorthak's flagship dead center, sending cascades of sparks through its pristine corridors. Vorthak found himself thrown from his command chair as his ship shuddered under the impact. Emergency lights flickered on as primary systems failed throughout the vessel. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see human ships closing in on his position. "All ships, retreat to secondary positions," he ordered desperately. "Reform the fleet. At coordinates 77 Alpha." But retreat was no longer an option. The human alliance had learned from every previous engagement, and they'd prepared for this moment. Zephyrian ships that tried to withdraw found their escape routes blocked by vessels that had somehow predicted their movements. Those that tried to regroup discovered that their communications were being jammed by technology they didn't understand. The tide of battle turned decisively when Ambassador Kethvar's command ship was boarded by human marines. The same alien who had sold humanity those corroded warships now found himself face to face with Admiral Chun herself, standing in the ruins of his once pristine bridge. "Admiral Chun," he said, his voice barely concealing his terror, I wish to discuss terms of surrender." Chun looked around at the damaged bridge, noting how different it looked from the clean, efficient human command centers she was used to. Everything here was designed for show rather than function, built by a species that had forgotten what real fighting looked like. "You sold us those ships because you thought we were weak," she said calmly. "You wanted to watch us fail and die slowly, but you made one mistake." "What mistake?" Kethvar asked. "You gave us something to work with. And humans have always been good at taking broken things and making them better." Around them, the sounds of battle were fading as more Zephyrian ships surrendered or fled. The largest military force in galactic history was being defeated by an alliance built around 12 corroded hulks that no one else had wanted. As news of the victory spread, something unprecedented happened throughout the galaxy. Species that had been subjects of the Zephyrian Empire for centuries began declaring their independence. The technological innovations developed by humanity were being shared freely, giving others the tools they needed to build their own defenses.